Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 4th, 2021, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. The joys of having a really simple last name for a guy in office. We're going to continue sort of a theme that we've been working on, and it's fairly simple, and yet the solutions are really complex. First is trying to get a reality on what's going on with the math. And if I'm a broken record, I absolutely am. But we're going to walk through this again. And I really appreciate from doing this a week ago, we did actually a whole bunch of sort of technology disruptions that would crash the price of healthcare, that would clean the environment, that would make bureaucracy much smaller, make us much more productive and wealthy as a society, help the poor, help the working middle class. And it's fascinating. Sometimes you go and we all make the mistake of reading the responses, trying to understand, saying, are we getting the message through? And the number of our brothers and sisters out there that are kind enough to comment, kind enough to help us, but also kind enough to say, hey, I didn't understand this. I don't understand what this number really means. So we're going to delve into a couple of those because the crisis is here. And it's not Democrat or Republican. I'm going to argue it's much more difficult. It's demographics. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of mess that I believe our Republican majority next year is going to have to clean up. And God willing, we will have the fortitude to do it. But the fact of the matter is, over the next 30 years, there's some really ugly numbers, and it has to do with the fact we got old as a society. Our baby boomers are retiring, and almost no one's comfortable telling the truth. So we're going to rapidly go through a number of these. And look, this is a board I show over and over just to try to help people get their head around it. See this red here? We're not going to even talk about 1965. We're going to go back and just stick with 2022. So functionally, the last year's budget cycle. Remember, we're running on continuing resolutions, so there's all sorts of other budgetary malfeasance going on around here. But here's where we're at. You see this red here? That's for last year's budget cycle. 71% of all the spending, and it's on autopilot. Because this is, hey, I turned 65. I get a health benefit. I work so many quarters, and I turn 65 or 70, wherever you choose, you get Medicare or Social Security, or you served in the military. Got to understand, the vast majority of your government is on autopilot. This blue here, that's defense. 13% of the 22 budget was defense. The other 16% was what we call non-defense discretionary. That's the EPA, that's the FBI, that's the Park Service, that's everything you actually think of as government is functionally only 16% of the spending. So there's a number of us who keep looking at different ideas and different numbers. And we keep trying to say, okay, what would happen if we actually took all the outlays and rolled them back to 2019, before the pandemic? But some of the math, and forgive me, but we were like working on this as we're walking over here to the floor. You got a math problem. First off, the discretionary is shrunk from, let's see, it's $52 billion bigger in 22 than it was in 2019. So that's real money. But what has exploded are two things: the mandatory, Social Security, Medicare, all these other things that are formula, and interest. 2019, we spent basically $376 billion in interest. We're functionally heading towards doubling that in the coming budget cycle. So you got to decide, if I could adopt the 2019 budget, we would actually, with the really substantial increases we've had in tax receipts, tax revenues, tax collections, whatever you want to call it, if we adopted the full 2019 budget, we would be even. How many members of Congress are ready to get up here and we're going to cut Medicare, we're going to cut Social Security, we're going to cut veterans benefits, we're going to actually somehow pay less interest on our debt? And this is the point I'm trying to make, is the vast majority of what is government is autopilot. And what we actually debate, the theater around here. So in 2019, 50% of what we'll call discretionary, 50% was defense. The other 50% of that $1,330 billion or $33 billion, and half of it was true discretionary. I'm trying to make the point, if you're going to save us, it's got to be an actual discussion mostly about healthcare costs. I'm going to show you some boards here. And this is another one I bring back and forth. And I'm shocked how many, even my brothers and sisters who are actually hopefully watching parts of this, or their staff are watching parts of this on their televisions, a few hundred televisions around this campus, will digest. And for some of my brothers and sisters on the left, they actually get really upset with me on this. You can't tell people that, but it's the math. Over the next 30 years, so starting today, 30 years from now, I'm getting tired of hearing myself say this, but I can't seem to get my brothers and sisters around here to digest the number. We're going to borrow $114 trillion. In today's dollars, 38 trillion of that is the shortfall in Social Security. When you add up, here's our shortfall and here's our financing costs. 80 trillion and a half are the shortfall in Medicare. So about 75, 25. How many politicians do you hear, how many accountants, how many smart people you see talking on financial television say, hey, we're heading towards a debt crisis and it's healthcare costs? Oh, by the way, the rest of the federal budget actually has about $1 trillion, $1.9 trillion positive balance. And you got to understand, it's autopilot. These are earned benefits. Your society, your government, your country made a deal with you. You work this many quarters, you reach this certain age, you're part of a certain tribal group, other things, you get these benefits. Fine. You think back 20 years ago, if we had taken parts of a little sliver of Social Security and allowed the individual to put it in private accounts, the accounts would have been so much more robust. Democrats absolutely demagogued that. Oh, that's the end of the world. And now we're here 20 years later, and we're a decade away from the Social Security Trust Fund being gone. How many members here get behind these microphones and are willing to tell their constituents the truth that you're heading towards about a 25 to 27% cut in Social Security unless we come up with some big, bold solution? And the problem is the constant, oh, let's just raise taxes. Except the problem is that's just the Social Security portion. The Medicare is 3/4 of all the coming debt. And the amount of taxes you have to raise, are you prepared for the amount that actually starts to slow down the economy? So there's another board. I have not shown this one in about a year. This is actually 2020 data. The numbers are actually much worse today because the healthcare inflation, I live in a place that has about 12% inflation. We're the highest in the continental United States, the Phoenix, Scottsdale area. But base inflation, healthcare inflation has been up around 16%. So these numbers are much uglier today. And this is really uncomfortable, and this makes people upset, but it is the math. A typical couple retiring, so let's say you're retiring right now. You're going to receive $3 for every dollar you put in. It's the math. Now on Social Security, you get what you put back in. You get a little bit of a spiff, but if you'd actually been able to put those dollars into the markets or into some other, a bond, you'd have much better. But on Social Security, you basically get back what you put in. Okay? Problem is, for that couple, on Medicare taxes, you will have paid about $161,000 in taxes, and you're going to get about $522,000 in benefits. It is this gap right here that bankrupts your country. It's healthcare costs. It's the math. And I know it upsets people, and if you want to read the actuarial reports, we'll be happy to send them to you, but it's the truth. And at some point, the political class needs to start treating the public like adults, tell you the truth, even when it's not what the political class here has said. It's waste and fraud. We don't tax rich people enough. Well, all that's a fraud. And going on right now, you got to understand the numbers are rolling on us. All the trillions and trillions of dollars of stimulus that were pumped into the economy, that set off inflation, that has made almost every American poorer. You got to understand, inflation is higher than wage growth. You are poorer today than you were a year ago. How many members of my brothers and sisters on the other side do you see get behind the microphones and show like they give a damn that America's workers and poor people are poorer today? Well, let's subsidize them more instead of blowing up the economy. And now you start to look at what's going on at this moment. We're already at $250 billion debt. And remember, our fiscal year began October 1st. And our spending is still exploding. The federal government spent $500 billion last month. And we're supposed to be out of the COVID spending crazy, and we're not. And I bring this chart just as a simple, sort of get our heads around the trajectory. So look, these two lines here, that's the 20 and 21, COVID. You see there are just huge amounts of government spending. But what's important here is you see this line right here. That's just, if you go back to normalize, get rid of these 2 years, just normalize. The debt is just going where everyone has modeled it. And this isn't new. This is being talked about for a quarter century. Does anyone remember when, what was it, one of the senior commanders of the U.S. military came here to Congress and testified and said, I believe the greatest threat to the United States long run is our debt. And the spenders around here, no, you can't talk about that. And one of the reasons I believe the public should be just livid with us is our unwillingness to treat them like adults. And the other thing that's going on, back to telling the truth again, 1980s. Does anyone remember the 1980s? Well, apparently, if you did the mean of the interest on U.S. sovereign bonds at that time, we were financing around 10% interest rates. But we had this artificially low interest. Now, killed you if you were a saver, killed you if you were trying to save for retirement. It was great if you wanted to go into debt. But I need you to look at something here. During 2020s, we had an average of 2.2% was the CBO calculation. They even project that when we go off into the future, we're going to double that. And it's already doubled today. So do we go back to the magic times where, hey, we're around 2%, 2010, 2% for the decade? Or if we double it, and what happens if we double U.S. interest rates? If we go up 2%, 30 years from now, we're at 280% of debt to GDP. Do you know if you go up, I think it was, what was the math, long term? I think it like 25 years, a 2% increase on here basically consumes every projected dollar of tax receipts. It's all our money. How many of you plan to live another 25 years? How many of you really believe we're going back to the age of 2% or less interest on U.S. sovereign debt? How many of you agree with the Congressional Budget Office that because we're going to be borrowing so much of the world's capital to finance our debt, that we're going to push up interest rates for ourselves and the world, and by doing that, we drive ourselves into bankruptcy even faster? Now, you don't actually go bankrupt. What happens is the economy slows down. You live in this sort of flatlined economy. There's almost no prosperity. There's no growth. Jobs become, every day you fall further behind. But that's the future the crap around here is heading towards. But we'll do some great virtue signaling bills. Maybe we'll ban plastic straws or do something really useful. And you sit down with our progressive friends and say, okay, let's walk through your math. Your math, not mine, your math. And understand, if I take your wish list, free college, the climate proposal, the jobs guarantees, the Medicare for all, and then add them already on the 15.7 baseline deficit, which is already higher today because of the growth in interest rates. And then I turn around and say, okay, we're going to tax all unearned income over $1 million. So you own rental houses, you do this, we're taking every dollar. You make more than $1 million, we take every dollar. And we'll add into that, we're just going to take all the wealth of billionaires, just every dime of it. Hey, why don't we take basically the entire defense budget and we'll just wipe out all defense protecting the country, even though that's constitutional. It doesn't get you anywhere. There's this, and this is the wish list on top of the fact we're already upside down. Do you understand how loony this place is? And you go over and over the math. The roster of the tax hikes. If we do all the tax hikes, hey, a 50% income rate for anyone making $200,000 or more. You start to say, we're going to eliminate all deductions. We're going to take payroll cap, so your FICA tax, and we're unlimiting it. So it just goes through the ceiling. Hey, you make $1 million, you pay 15.3% on that. It's Social Security, Medicare, unemployment. You take all those corporate taxes, put them back up to 35%. All these things, and then live in a fantasy world that you didn't slow the economy down. Do you know you only get 2/3 the way to covering the structural deficit that's already built in? And that's assuming that the fantasy world of, hey, I just taxed the crap out of my country, took all the available investment capital out of the country, and consumed it in taxes and government spending, but the economy will still maintain the same GDP growth and there'll never be another recession, another virus. The inability to have adult conversations around here of the proposals are lunacy. They're great politicking. You go home, stand up in front of town hall, tell them these things, you're lying to them. And everyone applauds, oh, I really want free stuff. And then you take the best estimate, and understand this number is probably double last year, the 2021, than it will be in the future years because this has huge amounts of the COVID fraud. Many of us believe the COVID unemployment may be the single biggest fraud, maybe in world history. We've seen some underlying reports. It could be a couple $100 billion. But let's pretend that the fraud and waste of 2021 was something we could capture. We can get every damn dollar. That's $662 billion. That's amazing. Now, it's a one-time thing. You get it back. We were able to collect every dollar, stop all the waste and fraud. Great. Except we're heading towards $2 trillion deficits at the end of the decade. So we took care of about a quarter of it. Now we need to work our heinies off to get every dollar of waste and fraud out of the system. We need to stop designing insane systems where we hand out money and we're going to figure out if you should have gotten it a year, 2 years, 3 years later. But we got to stop the fantasy that there are simple solutions. Last week I stood here and I showed the board saying, do you know if we got rid of every single dollar of foreign aid, the $38 billion of foreign aid, it paid for about 11 days of borrowing, not spending, borrowing. I know we've been told over and over, hey, there's simple solutions, tax the rich, get rid of foreign aid, waste and fraud. They're rounding errors in the scale of what's hitting us. But there are solutions, and damn it, I need us all, whether you be on the left or the right or the public that's just trying to understand, be willing to think differently. Be willing to stop this insanity of, well, we'll just do entitlement reform. Yeah, like that's going to ever happen. How many members of Congress are going to come here and vote? I cut Social Security, I cut Medicare. It's never going to happen, nor should we. Those are promises we have a moral obligation to keep. Now the moral obligation is, how do you finance them? How do you keep them? And every member who refuses to tell you the truth about the math is also putting them at peril. And you can't lie. My brothers and sisters on the left, you've got to tell the truth. Playing this game, oh, the 2017 tax reform, oh, it crashed revenues. Do you understand we are $1 trillion higher receipts, for those of us on Ways and Means Committee, than we were when we did the 2017 tax reform? It's a spending problem. If I had come to you in 2017 saying, hey, 4 years from now, we're going to be taking in $1 trillion additional revenue, you would have laughed your hiney off. But we did. But how can we still be so upside down? How can, in this year, when we're still not doing the crazy level of COVID spending, we're still $250 billion, and we're only, what, into our second, third month of this fiscal year? So I beg of us, you look at charts like this and you understand it really is a spending. It's a structural spending problem. And as I was just showing you, the really uncomfortable slide, over the next 30 years, it's Medicare and Social Security. It is what it is. And you look at the projections, and this slide is incredibly important for all my junior economists out there. We have times since the 1960s till today, we've had very high marginal tax rates. We've had low marginal tax rates. And guess what? We always seem to come in with high tax rates, low tax rates, good economy, poor economy. We always seem to ultimately come in right about 19% of the size of the economy in revenues, in receipts, in taxes. I need you to think about that. So if I want more revenue, I need an economy that grows the size of the nation, the wealth of this nation, the prosperity. The poor get less poor. The working middle class get rewarded for their work. Do policies that grow. And the benefit of that is that's how you get more tax receipts. Because you got to look here. Understand that our spending is heading towards 30% of the entire size of the economy. I know these are geeky numbers, but those are stunning numbers. And yet the number of times, and I showed you before all the projections, well, we'll just raise taxes. And then you look at our history, when we've done that, the growth, the size of the economy have flatlined, or they shrank. And so the total dollars in aren't what you prayed for. So look, I want to do a little bit of hope, and I also want to talk about a couple opportunities. And when we get back, I don't know when we come back to basically do this horrible omnibus and all these things, whether we'll get some floor time to go into more depth. But I do need to ask a question. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, can you share with me my time?
36 minutes remaining.
All right, I'm going to finish this up in 6 minutes, and then I'm going to yield back to you. I need us all to come back and think creatively. Okay, if I came to my brothers and sisters here who are elected, our staff, who are all freaky smart, a lot of them institutionalized, but they're smart. The public, who if they knew the underlying numbers, their creativity could break us through on the crap we're doing. If I came to you tomorrow and said, I need ideas that crash the price of healthcare, that for the 5% of our brothers and sisters who have chronic conditions, multiple chronic conditions that are well over 50% of our healthcare spending, what do we do to make them less sick? Maybe even cure them. What do you do to actually deal with environmental issues, but do it in a way where the economy still grows? Instead of this model the Democrats have brought us of, we're just going to subsidize everyone. And then wonder why the math ultimately blows up on us. And there's one opportunity that specifically interests me. I never want to hear another member basically come behind the microphone and say, we need to regulate this more. Or on my side, we need to deregulate this more. Can I beg of us to use the language, why don't we try some smart regulation? Why don't we join this century and use the technology we all walk around with supercomputers in our pocket. So what was it? We had the Supreme Court case. What was it? West Virginia versus the EPA that basically says Congress has been derelict in its duty for years, decades. Hey, EPA, wink, wink, nod, nod. We want you to do this, but we're not willing to tell our voters what we're willing to do because we're getting lobbied over here. So we're just going to hand over all of our congressional authority, our constitutional authority, to a bureaucracy. The Supreme Court said we got to stop doing that. And we do it with the EPA, we do it with securities regulations, we do it with everything. Guess what it means is we are going to have to start acting like adults here in this body and actually start reading our bills, working on the details, coming up with rational ways to make society safe, healthy, but prosperous. And I'm going to argue, and I have a little video out there, if someone wants to go look at it. It's Schweikert Environmental Crowdsourcing, YouTube. And it's just a simple concept of, you know, there's things you can attach to this that actually would calculate air quality. You know, PM10 or organics, other things. What would happen if you had a couple thousand of those floating around your community? You'd always know what's going on. If you had someone painting cars behind your house, you'd catch them immediately. But if you had a model like that, do you need the same 1938 command and control system? So I'm the motorcycle paint shop. Do they really need to file paperwork, fill up paper, file cabinets full of paper, because we all know file cabinets full of paper make the air quality cleaner. If you had a crowdsourced model of data, government could say, screw it. We're going to leave you alone, and we're just going to get the bad actors. If you're playing by the rules, you're using your scrubbers, you're playing by the rules, you get left alone. You don't need the permitting model. You can crowdsource the data, and you can do this with sound and water and transportation and smart cities. It would crash the size of the bureaucracy. And I know lots of folks saying, but what about all the government unionized workers? This is about getting a productivity bump and then holding that bump long term, because even if we can use technology to crash the price of healthcare and we don't get enough growth, I can't make the numbers work. We just adopted I have a 5-month little boy we're adopting. When he is 25 years old, his tax rate will be double all of ours. And it's already baked in the cake. It's done. We've already done this to our kids. Corporate tax rates, I don't know why corporations don't have to disclose that their taxes are doubling over the next 25 years. We make them disclose things about, potential environmental impairments. Why don't they have to disclose the fact that we're going to be doubling their taxes? And it's baked into the cake because to hold baseline services that we have promised with our population getting older, everyone's taxes is about to be doubled over the next 25 years. Unless, of course, you use technology to crash the price and dramatically increase the productivity. So there's other, I want to just do, this one is a little, borders on silly, but it's making a point. So the left is absolutely fixated on methane. Okay, methane is a huge greenhouse gas. Okay, we'll give them that. Now, a couple years ago, we had to recalculate its half-life. It's down to, 8-9 years for those of us who actually geek out on this stuff. And, we need to start shutting down use of hydrocarbons. We need to start calculating the methane load for any barrel of oil or any BTU of gas. And then there's articles out there saying, there's actually a really cheap solution. and I'm going to be a little silly. I believe it's copper oxidized clay. It's kitty litter. Do you know you can take a well or some other methane production source and it absorbs like a sponge, and it's dirt cheap. You know why? Because it's dirt. How many members of Congress have you seen here saying, we need to bring the researchers who did this and their academic studies and bring them here because we want to understand, is there a way we could actually be making the environment cleaner, better, faster, and still keep the economy growing? No. They're hell-bent on shutting down the use of hydrocarbons, even though there are solutions. Why wouldn't this place expand its intellect and be willing to at least bring in the scientists saying, wow, you did this study and it really works? Last week, and I got a little crap for this, and I just want to make the point again, we calculate over $500 billion a year in spending for people who don't take their pharmaceuticals properly. Now, I agree. You know, being someone with hypertension, I'm working really hard to work out and eat better and see if I can bend it and never have to take a calcium inhibitor or even a statin or those things, which that's cholesterol. But we know for a fact that if a population were to take their prescriptions, and some of this is true for diabetes and everything else, it's 16% of all healthcare spending. Now, what if you could get half that? Because right now we estimate the number is probably about $520, $530 billion a year in healthcare costs because grandma didn't take her pill, or someone stroked out, or those sorts of things, where a pill that's pennies. So a pill bottle cap that beeps at you in the morning that costs 99 cents and reminds you to take it has hundreds of billions of dollars of potential impact. Is that difficult? Well, apparently around here that idea is difficult. The lack of science, the lack of math, the lack of basic creativity. And then there's my holy grail. And this is truly the holy grail. And I pray to the dear Lord, let what I'm reading be true. 33% of all America's healthcare spending is diabetes. 31% of all Medicare spending is diabetes. Now, most of that's type 2, it's not type 1. And type 2, in many ways, there's a lot to it. It's ultimately autoimmune, but it is partially self-inflicted. Is this body willing to have one of the most difficult political debates and conversations it's ever considered in the modern times? Are we willing to change the Farm Bill? Are we willing to change the incentives, what we incentivize our brothers and sisters to eat? Are we willing to incentivize our brothers and sisters to be healthy? You all saw the numbers of the misery this place brought to the nation with the shutdowns and how many of the zip codes around this country have doubled their obesity numbers. But why this is important is apparently we've been on the cusp. We've had a handful of people who look like they've been cured of type 1 diabetes. And it's less than a year. Maybe it ultimately doesn't work. But this is a big deal. Why aren't we working on it? Why aren't we? Because if it's 31% of all Medicare spending, and we were able to help our brothers and sisters who are getting their feet cut off and going blind, wouldn't that be the compassionate thing? Wouldn't that be the moral thing? Instead of this damn conversation we have here, well, let's build more clinics so people can manage their misery. I beg of you, if we're on the edge of a cure for, you saw last week, it finally got approved, hemophilia. We got a single shot cure. Really expensive, work out the financing. Cystic fibrosis, we may be on the cusp. Sickle cell anemia. Why doesn't this place seem to give a damn about people's misery and suffering? Oh, by the way, they're part of the 5%, that's the 50% that's also really good economics. I ask anyone that's watching this, think differently. Curing our brothers and sisters, fixating on economic growth, crashing the price of technology by legalizing technology is the only path I can come up with that saves us from the debt crushing. And the fact of the matter is, if you actually look at the models, means the next couple decades could be really prosperous. I just need this place to act very, very differently. And with that, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back.